Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, first let me start by thanking Rockefeller and Albany Law for doing something which doesn't happen often enough, which is provide the community with an opportunity to actually engage in a discussion, a civil discussion, almost, about ideas, about values, about policies that affect the lives of every single New Yorker. It does not happen often enough, and if I am privileged enough to be here today, I just urge this community to continue to do that. Of course, thankful to Abe for his consistent neutrality, coming as he does from the hard right, as moderator, and to John for his always effective and knowledgeable presentations. Now, those of us who are privileged to have or are currently serving in the Albany government arena swim in a sea of ideas, but mainly of numbers and policies and statutes and votes. And sometimes we lose sight of the fundamental values that brought us into this arena. And sometimes, as leaders, we substitute an analysis of numbers and policies and statutes and meetings and votes for a fundamental look at what we are like as people and what sort of society we want and what sort of values we really stand for. The extraordinary events in Wisconsin are of interest and importance, not just because of the policies that we're going to go back and forth on today, but because they really force us to ask this question. What is the relationship between the government and the people? How do we compensate the people who provide those services? What rights do they have as Americans, as citizens, and employees? If you heard any one thing from John, it was his description of the collective bargaining process as a privilege. That is not my America. That is not the values that I see that a government and a society should embrace. Collective bargaining represents democracy in the workplace. It represents an understanding that in a democracy, the best way to solve a problem, the best way to deal with contentious positions and difficult positions is to bring everyone together and have them compromise and work it through. The alternative model, the model of command and control by one party, is un-American in the end. And it's been rejected across the United States. Come we now to a fiscal crisis. I'll lay aside a moment who is responsible for the fiscal crisis. Whose financial manipulations, which policies caused us the suffering we now daily acknowledge. But the remedy is not just deal with the economics of the problem, which will require things like cuts and reductions in benefits. It is an inevitable consequence of reality. But to embrace them as though they were in the public interest without examination, and to explain that the real problem is the worker making an average of $30,000, $40,000, or $50,000 providing essential services, that I do not accept. As to the particulars of the Wisconsin argument, remember, they embraced the numbers. John is just wonderful at numbers. He knows them. He doesn't make them. He mainly doesn't make them up. But they tell us only one small part of the story. I am not here to defend the level of salary and benefits that municipal and public employees currently get. I don't want to do that. I want that solved at the collective bargaining table. But the history of how we got here will inform us a little bit more than a list of the horrors we're facing. How is it we have collective bargaining? Well, the fundamental reason is because as a society, we decided that there were a class of Americans who were not going to be given the fundamental human rights that we think every human being is entitled to. There are a class of human beings who are going to be told, you cannot organize yourselves in a group and withhold your labor. There are a class of Americans we believe should not have the right to strike. When the Soviet Union used to say that, there was no right to strike against the public interest. We went, there go those commies again. But here, we decided that public employees should not have the right to strike. Okay. Comes, by the way, largely out of a strike broken by that great progressive Calvin Coolidge in Boston in 1919, I think. Okay, there are reasons. A master of numbers. There are reasons for that. But if you withdraw that right and say an American citizen can't do that, what then do you substitute for that? The imprimatur and the sovereign power of the state? These are the conservatives who want to do this. No, said America. We will allow for bargaining and we'll make sure both sides bargain. Now, in that process, the fright right now says governments are morons. They don't know how to bargain. The unions are too smart for the government. I don't buy that. We have an enormously talented governor and have had occasional enormously talented governors in the past. We have a hardworking, competent, and honest legislature. Thank you, Mr. Lansman, Mr. Magnarelli.
More so in the past.
They know how to bargain. And we also have a law called the Triborough Amendment, which says, because we have withdrawn the right to strike, and because we're going to force bargaining, at the end of a contract, what do? You could simply say, the state will impose conditions at the expiration of the contract. Or you could say the conditions of the contract survive. Almost every state has some version of this. In New York, because we're now in a financial crisis, the obvious consequence of that is that when things are tough, there's no incentive for the union to bargain away benefits. It's true. Is offset by the fact that when things are flush, government doesn't have to give raises. It can rely on Triborough. There is an equality of power here. What, in the end, you're hearing from John is that we will impose economic conditions on Americans. I don't buy it. And in the end, this system can work. The unions of this state are smart, public-spirited, understand the problem, and are willing and able to, in the end, be partners in a process that yields an economic relief for taxpayers, which is a desirable thing, and fair wages. Look, I am not going to compete with John on numbers right now. But I'll tell you this. A state in which the average pension is about $30,000, and a state where the average wage is 40-ish, does not seem to me to be the heart of the economic crisis that the state and the United States face. There are adjustments that should and will be made, but at the time you make those immediate adjustments, to throw the baby out with the bathwater and change the fundamental values of our system is the wrong thing to do. Let me close, since Abe is hopefully telling me I have 1 minute.
With checking.
With what was said in yesterday's New York Times about what's going on in Wisconsin. The turmoil in Wisconsin is not only about bargaining rights or the pension payments of public employees. It's about transparency and openness. It's about neighborliness, decency, and mutual respect. In the end, our commitment to collective bargaining is a commitment to a society that says the powers of government are not the only source of authority and decision. That we share those. We have a society that allows for people to organize and express themselves. And for any of what John has proposed to come to New York today would be a mistake in the short run, a mistake in the long run, and hurt the quality of our common experience as much as it will in the long run hurt our economic health and safety.